Yeah. Did I ever turn my camera on? It's running. Huh? It's just local. It's not going anywhere. I've got to download it or upload it and all that. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're going to be talking about Susan Mills Trotter, who is our great, great, great grandmother. And specifically, we're going to talk about her husband, Joel Trotter. And then we're going to look at the descendants that she has in the Goodson family. And then we're going to go back and look at the ancestors briefly, the Lewis family. And so we'll start off with the husband here. And of course, here's a picture of the Trotters, the Goodsons. And that is Lillian, which is Grandma's mom. And this is her older sister, Marie. A little bit closer view of this. Huh? Her mom's name was Lily. Lily Goodson. Lily Henry Goodson. Two L's there. But anyway, this is a picture of her when she was 61. Now, what would you say about her there? Would anyone have any words to describe Grandma right here?
She was 61.
61, right there. It's 1972. She was born in 1911. Isn't that 61 years? I think so. Anyway, I was trying to come up with one word. Attractive. That's my word.
Yeah.
But if you can come up with something else, that's better. But she was learning to play the guitar at this time. Now we're going to go way back to the Trotter Cemetery, which is in Carrollton, Missouri. And we've been there before, and we saw Joel's grave, tombstone there, and here it is. We're going all the way back to the Civil War. And the Civil War is when all of this happened. And I want to go over a little bit of background to what was happening to get to the point of his story. But this is the only picture that we have of Susan Mills Trotter is from a newspaper clip. And that's what that is.
Yeah.
And I've just got a portion of it right there because it was with her third husband, which I'll show here in just a few minutes. But this is her oldest daughter, Marion. And you can see there's two names on this tombstone. And I'm going to be explaining who the other person is. Alexander Stanley is his name. But we have no picture of Joel Trotter. We only have a picture of his youngest son and of his oldest son. And his youngest son was Frank. He's the first one on the left there. And this was John. And he was born in 1862. Joel died in 1864. And he was born in 1855. And Miriam was born in 1853. So she's the oldest one out of 6 children that she and Joel had. And she ended up with 2 more children, too, from 2 more marriages after Joel passed away. But this is our great-grandfather, James Roy Goodson. I've always wondered, Uncle James was named James Roy. I wonder if he was named after his grandpa. Yeah, that's who it is. That's him right there. And of course, yeah, well, that's my middle name also. So, and there's Grandma. Oh, yeah, Roy, sure. And of course, she lived to be, Susan lived to be 86, lived until 1918. And this was her oldest daughter, right there, Miriam, who was our great-great-grandmother. And now I'm going to go back to September and October of 1864 to get the story of Joel Trotter down. We go back to the northern part of Missouri, north of the Missouri River. We find there's all kinds of conflict taking place, all kinds of turmoil. There was gangs around who were part of the Confederacy. And one of the places that they took was Keatsville. And you can see that it was in the fall of 1864. George Todd took his men, the guerrillas from the Confederate forces, part of Quantrill's raiders. And there were 3 different gangs involved in this, and we'll go over that in just a minute. But this is the landscape right here. General Price was the head of the Confederates there, and he was trying to recruit new soldiers in all of this. And Quantrill's raiders, which was a guerrilla, a gang, and Quantrill, I think, is the man number 2 there in the picture there. They took Keatsville. They destroyed the courthouse. There were 35 men who were the Union soldiers there, and General Price's men came with 250. Now, what's going to take place? Well, they surrendered. And everyone was okay except for the sheriff. They killed him. And they killed a Union spy there. And then they destroyed the courthouse. Just a little background before we get to Joel Trotter here. And so Todd and his men, they went into Chariton, crossing the Grand River at the Rock Ford. And this information comes from the 1881 Carroll County records of Carroll County, 1881. And so they went in. There was 130 men who were occupying Centralia, which was southeast of Keatsville. And there were 300 men that came, including gangs who were part of the guerrilla. And some of the guerrilla gang was Frank James and Jesse James were part of that group. So you can see here that we have Waverly down here, and we have Centralia, where there was 130 men. They came in there with some of the gangs, and they killed every man but 4. And one of the gangs was known as Bloody Bill Anderson, and you can understand why he's called Bloody Bill Anderson. They killed 104 out of the 130 men who were occupying that place. And so here we are in south of the Missouri River. This is October of 1864. And they crossed the Missouri River. 3 men crossed. And General Price gave them leave of absence, and they were to go north into Carroll County and Livingston County, which is right north of Carroll County. And they were to recruit new men. But as they went across the Missouri River, they were wearing Union uniforms. And so they went up to this one house, as Mr. Miller, and it was breakfast time. And they were having breakfast. And they came up there on their horses, and they demanded that food be brought to them. And not that any new food be made, they wanted it right then. And so he was asking them they were asking Mr. Miller some questions. Are there any Union soldiers around here? Well, we haven't seen any, and it doesn't seem to be occupied and all that. So they felt safe in going north, and they went north to Coloma, right here. And then they went through town. Then they went north over into here, into a timber area there. And it was there that these 3 men who were in Union uniforms, and they were actually Confederate soldiers, Captain Beatty found out about them being there, and he took 15 men with him, and he knew that he could just capture these men. There shouldn't be any problems just capturing them. But Captain Perry, one of the Confederate soldiers, picked up his pistol and shot. 1 shot. Well, he couldn't restrain his men, and boy, they went after them, and they killed they killed 2 of them. 1 of them escaped. But after they killed them, they took their uniforms, and 1 of them took the boots off the man, put it on, and they still had good uniforms. And they took those uniforms and used them. And there's all kinds of stories that go about they begged for their lives and all that. Well, we don't know exactly what the story was. But what they found after this is the Confederates were dressed in the federal uniforms, and they were sufficient to warrant their deaths. And they behaved as bushwhackers, that is, as gang members. and not the regular Confederate soldiers, but they were regular Confederate soldiers. And so they also believed that they belonged to Bill Anderson's, that bloody Bill Anderson's gang. And part of that gang also included Frank and Jesse James were part of that. And so they shot, and it ended up those two men were killed. But that's not the end of the story. The end of the story is that there were 6 other men out of revenge who lost their lives because of that incident. And 2 were totally innocent. And so I'm going to explain that here in just a moment. So here they are coming up to Carrollton. There were about 300 to 800 Confederate soldiers. And there was about 150 Union soldiers plus 50 citizen militia who were occupying the town. And they come up, and the commander, who was D.A. Williams, his brother Monroe Williams was one of the 2 who was shot by Beatty's group. And so they come up, and he's after revenge. And he comes up there, and he demands that they surrender, and he claims to have 1,500 men, but he didn't have that many. But he claimed to have that many men with artillery, and they were going to take that town no matter what. And so the commander of the Union soldiers, he agreed to meet with him, and he took the surrender. And he said that all the men would be paroled the next day. They'd just lay down their arms, and they'd be paroled. And so they came into town. They had all their guns laid down on the north side of the town. And here comes the Confederate soldiers. But they took them, and they took those 200 men, and they were prisoners for the next 48 hours. They let the officers leave, but one of the officers, the head officer, he wanted to stay with the men. And so what they did is they started sacking all the businesses that were there. They went to every safe they could, and they took the money out of that. But there were some Union soldiers that got out of there with $40,000, and they went north, Chillicothe, and they were able to take that money and some of the money down to a bank in St. Louis. So not everything was lost, but they went up to Chillicothe, and here it is in 1907. I couldn't get a picture of it way back in the Civil War times, but they took all that money. And can you imagine how much $40,000 would be worth today, back in the Civil War times? That's a lot of money that was there. So anyway, they took the 200 men, they took them south out of town, they went across the Missouri River. They were taking these men toward General Price, who was the Confederate general. They went across the Missouri River to Grand Pass, and it was there at Grand Pass that this D.A. Williams, who was the brother to the one who was killed, he announced, and he said that he got this authority from higher officers. He called out 6 men from Beatty's group. And the 6 men who were called out, 2 of them were innocent in all of this. And they took those 6 men down to a ravine, and they just shot them out of revenge. And there were some ladies that lived nearby, and they could hear the shots. And they ran down there to see. Every one of those men were dead. And then we find that there were 2 other men who showed up, and they temporarily buried them. But then the local people came and got them. There were 2 men who were innocent. Who were those 2 men? Right here. Joel Trotter, our great-great-great-third-great-great-great-grandfather, and Alexander Stanley. And we find that there was also John Street, James Street, William Silkey, and John F. Addison, who were all killed. They were part of the group, though, those other 4. But these 2 were not. And we find that Joel Trotter, a statement was made about him in 1881. And remember, this is our great-great-great-grandfather. This is what was said about him. Joel Trotter was universally esteemed, and we respect his memory to this day, which was 17 years later. And so he had been county surveyor, and at another time he was county assessor. And he was in the prime of his life, leaving his wife and small family, Susan Ann, and 6 children from the ages of 2 to 11, and the oldest being our great-great-grandma, Miriam Trotter Goodson. And so we find also that there was a young man named Alexander Stanley. And here's what's said about this man. He was a young man of much promise. He had a brother that was in the Union Army, and he was in Tennessee, and he was in a battle at Nashville. And this is what was said about him. His 36-year-old brother, Alan Wakefield Stanley, also died that year of wounds in a battle at Nashville, Tennessee. Can you imagine how the parents felt about those 2 boys of theirs, a older brother and a younger brother? And here's something interesting also. Alan Wakefield Stanley married Mary Jane Goodson in December 1855. And this is her brother Alvin Goodson from the 1800s. And this picture came from the box that came from Uncle Kent. This picture right here. You see a little bit closer view of that. But Mary Rebecca Trotter, who was the daughter of Joel and Susan Trotter, and was called a nugget of gold by her grandfather, John Trotter. And Alvin Goodson was also the first cousin to our great-great-grandfather, James Josiah Goodson. And he was also married to Mary Rebecca Trotter, the younger sister to our great-great-grandma Miriam. So these 2 Goodson cousins married 2 Trotter sisters. They were first cousins who married 2 sisters there. Now, does anyone know who Alexander Stanley is in all this? Again, he was a young man of much promise. And his father's name was the Honorable James Stanley, the father of Alexander and brother to Joel Trotter's mother, Miriam Stanley Trotter. Joel and Alexander were first cousins. Joel was 34. He was 19. And so this is what was said of Mr. Stanley's. He was a judge. Mr. Stanley's court was the Supreme Court. No appeal was ever taken from that court. Both plaintiff and defendant quietly submitted to his decision, for they knew him to be a man of sterling moral integrity. Seldom have we been called upon to mourn the death of one whose past life has been so identified with the history of this county, and though he lived here for more than half a century, he had no enemies, but was known, honored, and beloved by all as a just and honest man. James was Joel Trotter's uncle. And you can go and you can see his tombstone there at the Trotter Cemetery in Carrollton, Missouri. And they set up a new tombstone for Joel Trotter's parents. And Miriam there is the sister to James Stanley. So that was a little bit of history about her husband, Joel Trotter. Now I want us to go through briefly some pictures of the descendants, the Goodson family. Joel's wife, our great-great-grandmother, lived to be 86. And again, there's no pictures of her, but I'll show you one here in just a minute from a newspaper clip. But here is our great-great-grandfather, James Josiah Goodson, with his wife, Miriam, who used to be Trotter, married him. And that is their granddaughter, Inez. And I don't know how she's connected. But this was taken, he died in 1919, so it was taken before that time. And that's a little bit closer picture of that. Here's another picture before his death. And we see family members behind them. And here's another picture. I don't know how that turned out. But they are buried in the Olive Cemetery, which is up in Webster County, Missouri, which is right by Springfield, Missouri, in Webster County, right there. So here's another picture of Miriam and her family. And when you look closely, you'll see right over her right shoulder a young man named James Roy Goodson. And that's our great-grandfather. Now, some of us is great-great-grandfather, but most of us is our great-grandfather. And here is Miriam with some of her grandchildren. And here are her three oldest children. There's Sarah, there's John, and there's Miriam right there. This is a picture of Miriam later in life right here. And then here is James Roy Goodson. And I kind of brought this up a little bit. What is he holding there? Can anyone figure that out? Huh?
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And James Roy, here's another picture of him. And I want you to take a look at it. What would you say about him? Right there. James Roy, right there. And then that is, right next to him is Bertha Goodson to the right at the top. Bertha Cantrell Goodson was married to Roy's brother, Isaac Newton, who died in 1900. So what does that tell you about the date of this picture? Before 1900, obviously. Now, shifting gears just a little bit, we're looking at Grandma's mother, Lily Henry. And this is when she was 14 years old. And this is when she was 18 years old. A little bit closer picture. Here she is amongst a big bunch of turkeys. Are those turkeys or? Yeah, turkeys. Yeah. And here is our grandma's grandparents on her mother's side, right here. And Lily Goodson is buried in Neosho, Missouri. And you can see that she lived from 1884 to 1971. So how old did that make her? 1687, something like that. Here is Roy in 1927, James Roy, with a Model T pickup right there, 1927. And here he is again with a Model A, that is. Now, he had a cousin, James Roy had a cousin named Jesse Anderson Goodson. No, it was his brother, his older brother to James Roy Goodson. And you can see that he lived to be 89. And he lived in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. And James Roy and his family, which included our grandma and her older sister, they were all there. And they came. And the girls, they went to church that day to Broken Arrow. It would have been a Church of Christ right there. And they went there. And then on their way back home, somehow the horses got away. And so the oldest sister that was among them, her name was Marion also, so let's just sit here. Let's just sit here and wait and see what happens. Because I think Daddy's going to come and Uncle James Roy's going to come and help us. And so sure enough, those horses went right back to the farm and they followed the hoof tracks and they came right up and they rescued the girls and they were all safe and sound and everything turned out okay. And by the way, that is not, I couldn't find a picture. This is just an old archive picture that I picked up for that time period. And because I don't think there were several girls on the buggy. I don't think you get several girls on that buggy, could you? But anyway, one of the sisters was Emma, and here's a picture of Emma. And here's a picture of her two older sisters. And this is Miriam and Lillian Goodson. Here is a picture of Grandma, and she's right there. And that is Marie, and that's Emma, their cousin, their first cousin, right there. And here is Grandma, right here, and Marie, and a friend, right there. A little bit closer view of them. And we find that the whole family was kind of together in the 1930s, or about 1937. And looking at this picture, can you see Grandma in this picture, anyone? Huh? I'm thinking that's who it is. Is that who you were thinking, Mark? All right, Mark got it right. We'll give him credit for that. And Grandma's in this picture. Can anyone pick out who she is? That's right. And that is supposed to be her older brother, Carl, with the hat on there.
He's always skinny and tall.
Yeah. You saw him a lot more than I did. But here's a picture of her whole family. Of course, her dad died in 1941. And I've discussed this many times with Jimmy, talking about both of our interest in the family history now. And we both wished we had had this same interest way back when Grandma was living, so she could tell us all kinds of stories, but we didn't. Huh?
That's Carl.
That's, there's Grandma, there's Carl, there's Marie, there's Alvin, there is Lois, and Eunice, I think, and that's her mother, Lily, and Evelyn. Is that her name, Evelyn? Does anyone remember? Okay. But I thought his name was Carl, didn't you? But look how they spelled it. With an O there. Yeah.
He always said Carl.
Did he say Carl? Yeah. Well, we've got the pronunciation down correctly. And here he is right here with a 1937 Chevy. Here's Evelyn with, I guess, her favorite dog. I don't know. In 1930. Here's that picture again of Grandma with her mother and her older sister, Marie. And here's a picture of Lois and Grandma and Eunice. And I remember when we were living in Colorado, we'd come down to visit Grandma. We would always go over to Eunice's house, Eunice Kidwell, and we would visit with them. Does anyone remember doing that that's here? Yeah. We did it. We would always go over there, and she came down with breast cancer and died at a young age. But here's a picture of Grandma with her sisters and her mother, all of them right there. And for some reason, she always gets in the center of the picture, isn't she? There. Here's a newer picture of her and three other sisters. Here is Alvin. And one of the things that Alvin did, I remember us visiting in Neosho, Missouri, and then we went north to Joplin, Missouri. Well, Alvin had a record shop there. And I was about 10 years old, and we went into that record shop, and Alvin told my dad, he said, well, let Kenny pick out a couple of albums. And so I picked out a couple. You know what I got? The Tijuana Brass. Oh, yeah. Herb Alpert. That's right. That was neat. Yeah, it was a good choice. Sure. Here's a picture of our grandparents. And of course, we see that. Yeah. Yeah. Going back to some of their early childhood days, and you've seen this picture before. Now there's Uncle Kent. No, that's Uncle Sidney. But there's Shirley and Joyce right there. Here's a picture of all the family right here. He always liked to wear hats, didn't he? Yeah. Here's a newer picture. And your older sister's pictured there, Jamie Lou. Yeah. You can see her in 1958. Yeah.
All the boys pretty much had the same hairdo.
Yeah.
Is that Jimmy?
Yeah, that's
That's Dwayne.
Dwayne. That's Jimmy, I think. That's me. Is that Donnie? I don't know. Who's the baby? Did anyone figure that out? Oh, is that Ron? Ron, at least I got you in the picture, didn't I? Here's a picture of all the brothers and sisters right there. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was kind of, yeah, at least he had some hair to blow. Here's another picture when you used to live outside of town here. Here's some good looking cousins right here. Yeah. And here we go. This is the last picture of this section. And this is from last year. And before we get through tonight, I would like for everyone to come up here and we'll take another little video. You'll get in the end of this video, okay? That's from last year. And I thought that was going to be a video, but it's not turning out that way. But that's some of us that were here last year. Here's Grandma with two of her sisters. And now I want to give you just one more little section here. The Lewis family. Now we go back to the Trotter Cemetery, and then also the Roosevelt Cemetery, which is in Roosevelt, Oklahoma. In Roosevelt, Oklahoma is where Susan Trotter is buried. And you can see we've already looked at that. And here is the whole picture of her with her third husband, Charles. And there it is. I did not know. I asked Jimmy, there's not one picture of our great-great-grandmother. And he said, oh, I've got this little clip from a newspaper. I said, well, send it to me. And so I've included it here. Now, her mother was buried in Ethel Cemetery. And you can see that is in Grayson County. Grayson County, Texas. That's north of Sheridan. Is it Sherman? Sherman. That's the area. And here's her tombstone right there. Her parents were buried in Montgomery County, Missouri. And this is what it looks like. Judith Thompson. And then her husband, William Poindexter, both in Grayson, Montgomery County. Here we have a picture of Judith Thompson. And if you notice, here are her parents, right here. And then we also have Robert Lewis and another, Jane Merriweather. And then her grandparent, Mary Lewis's grandparents, John Lewis and Elizabeth Warner there. And I want to explain a little bit about Elizabeth Warner here in just a moment. But we're going back to Albemarle County, Virginia. And what's in Albemarle County? Yeah, that's Monticello. Right there. Mary Lewis, right there, was born in that county, along with several of her brothers and sisters. And two of her outstanding brothers were William Lewis and Nicholas Lewis. And I always heard as I was growing up from Grandma and others, it seemed like, you are related to Meriwether Lewis. Did you ever hear that, any of you? You're growing up, you're related to Meriwether Lewis. Okay. Well, yeah, I see that. William Lewis was the father of Meriwether Lewis. And Mary Lewis, our great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, was the aunt to Meriwether Lewis. That's how we're connected. But we also, so here's Albemarle County, and you can just see what it looks like here. That's beautiful country, I think. Here's a picture. Well, what did Meriwether Lewis look like? Well, there was a portrait made of him, and there you have that. His father was William Lewis, and he was part of the army in the Revolutionary War. He came back to visit took a 5-day leave of absence to come back and visit his family. And Meriwether was just 5 years old at this time. His neighbor was Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson said this about Meriwether Lewis's father. Jefferson described his neighbor and friend William Lewis as a man of good sense, integrity, bravery, enterprise, and remarkable bodily powers. And so he was part of the Revolutionary War. And he did not like what the British were doing. So he volunteered without pay, and he took care of all of his own expenses, and he went out and he fought against them. And when he came back, he was only there for 5 days, and he said, I've got to get back with my men. He was trying to cross this river, and it was flooding, and he had his horse, and they were going across, and somehow the horse got swept away, and he swam, and the horse drowned, but he made it to the other side, and the closest place he could go to was his wife's parents' house. And he got there, and he was drenching wet. It's in the winter, and he came down with pneumonia and died 2 days later. So Meriwether lost his father at the age of 5 in all of this. Now his uncle, Nicholas Lewis, had this farm with 1,000 acres, and you can kind of see Nicholas Lewis here. And one of the British Colonel Bannister Tarleton. Did anyone ever see The Patriot, the movie The Patriot? The Patriot had a really evil British officer in it, and that's who this guy is. And he took over our, however you explain, Nicholas Lewis's farmhouse there. It's kind of a headquarters. And it stood until the Civil War. And do you see who else occupied it? General George A. Custer. And so there's a burial place for him. He was in the Revolutionary War. And this is what Thomas Jefferson said about him. He was endeared to all who knew him by his inflexible probity. And whenever you look at that idea of probity, it's actually purity morally. He was courteous. He had a good disposition, benevolent heart, and engaging modesty and manners. And anytime there was a conflict in the county, guess who both people wanted in the conflict? To be in the middle, to arbitrate it. Nicholas Lewis was the man. And so here we have Mary Lewis. There's nothing said about Mary Lewis, by the way. I guess it was a men's world back in those days. But we've talked about the 2 brothers that she had, but her grandmother was Elizabeth Warner. And Elizabeth Warner married a John Lewis, and they lived at what was known as the Warner Hall down here. And they inherited that. And when you look at this, it's still, well, it burned in 1849, but they rebuilt it on the same foundation. And it was occupied by the Lewis family until the burning of the building. But they still have, when you go into the building, I understand, I've never been there, but they still have all the information about the Warner family and the Lewises and all of the connections that are there. There's also a grave side there, and that is where our great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, Elizabeth Warner, is buried, and also her father is buried there. Her sister's name was Mildred Warner, who married a Lawrence Washington. They ended up becoming the grandparents of George Washington. And so that's how we have the connection. Now in 1853, there was a French sculpturist, and he wanted to make a mold of George Washington when he was 53 years old. And this is what he came up with. And this is at the Virginia University there. Have you ever seen these people? They go in and they look at historical figures and they try to picture them, how they would look. Well, this is from the mold that was made when he was 53 years old. And she puts the uniform on him. And just watch what happens here. Now, I thought he had wooden teeth, didn't he? But did they color him white? Yeah. Okay, but when he was 53, he may have still had his teeth. I don't know.
He's not strong now,
Yeah, yeah. That is really weird, isn't it? There's one more little piece in this. If he were president today, that's what he'd look like. Yeah. But here we have the story, and one of the persons in the story is our grandma. I called her grandma. I don't know what you called her. But anyway, I was thinking about her, and of course she was a very attractive grandma, and she always seemed to have such a dedication to her family. I felt like I was the most important grandchild she had. But I bet each one of you can feel the same way. When we would come and visit her, and she liked to make pies, one of the things that she would make for me is a sugar-free apple pie. And they were good. It was good.
I remember making apple pie.
Yeah. But I don't know if any of you would like to come forward and make a statement about Grandma. I'll put you on recording here. If you've thought of one thing you can think of, then pick up this little mic and come forward in front of the computer over here. And who would like to say something? It can be very brief, but we don't want to have a real long, just make it brief. Okay, come on, Kent. You can pick up the mic.
Okay, so when I was
You need to move over by the computer.
when I was 4 years
There you go.
old, my mom, Shirley, and I drove from Abilene. I assumed Jimmy was already in school, during school, and so it was just her and I drove up, picked up Grandma Irene. We drove to Neosho and to Joplin to see Aunt Marie and Aunt Eunice, and just the family over there. And my mom used to talk about how on that trip I sang Sunday school songs the whole way there and the whole way back. Must have drove them nuts, but when she told the story, she didn't let on that it did. But anyway, I remember that trip and how much Grandma enjoyed being there with Marie and Eunice and that family, and meeting the Copes, and seeing them, and I just remember that trip being a delight there. I also just wanted to say one more little story where Mother used to tell me that at times when they were growing up, that if there were times that we only had beans to eat, so eat your, whatever she's trying to get me to eat, and then I'm at Grandma's, and Grandma Irene says, you kids, when you were growing up, I bet I baked you a pie or a cake or something every day. And I'm like, what? What happened to the beans?
Yeah. Okay, very good. Who's next? Who wants to be next? It can be something short. Anyone? Come on, you're gonna get on YouTube. It's gonna be fantastic.
Okay. So I think three things. I remember Nanny making caramel pie. Yeah. Yeah. And we'd go up for Christmas, and that was something to look forward to. I remember my dad being impressed that when she decided to learn to play guitar, that she bought a Martin D29. So she only the best. And so she did give that to Dad. So anyway, I've gotten to play that guitar, so that was good. The other thing I remember Dad saying about his mom was that um, as an adult, he did not eat fried chicken. And the reason he didn't eat fried chicken was because Nanny would send them out to, get a chicken, and then Nanny would wring the chicken's neck, and it was their job to pluck all the feathers off. And they ate fried chicken about 3 times a week, and so he ate all the fried chicken he wanted. But he also talked about how it was personal. I mean, you're going out there to pick a chicken and eat it. And so anyway, that was one of the memories he had, and he would tell us about that every once in a while. Well, in addition to Uncle James shooting his Manny chickens, but that didn't have anything to do with Nanny, but that's a good story too.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I love Nanny. She loved me. It was good to be there. I remember her making you and Rhonda, a sugar-free pie, which was very considerate. But she was a great cook. And I guess one more thing. So I always remember her getting after Romy, like all the time getting after Romy. And Romy seemed unhappy about that, but she would always, there seemed to be a conflict between her and Romy. But and Romy was weird. I get that, but. Anyway, I do remember that too. So anyway, Nanny was fun.
Okay, fantastic. I got one. Come on over.
Talking this?
Yeah.
I just remember being a pretty small kid, and Grandma was dating Raymond. Y'all remember Raymond? He was the one-man band. He had the cymbals between his knees, and he had a little bird with a bulb and it had water in it, and it would tweet. He was playing guitar, and she was dating Raymond, but she was also dating Romy at the same time. And Romy came over and asked, Romy was over, and I was just like, yeah, do you know Raymond? Oh, no. I said, Grandma said she wasn't going to marry you or Raymond. And he's like, oh, okay, Raymond. And he gave me a $5 bill. So he just said, let me know whatever you hear. So anyway, I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
Okay, and Romy used to race his car back and forth on the road in front of Grandma's house. He had that, was it a 70 Nova, red Chevy Nova? And he was racing the high school kids up and down in front of her house all the time.
Okay. Ron, you want
to? What I remember about Grandma is she had a great laugh. She was always happy to see you. She'd say laws of mercy, things like that, She was a great grandma. Couldn't beat her.
That's right. So I just set it down.
So you remind me of Raymond. We used to go to Frederick and play music all weekend. And they had an old reel-to-reel tape recorder we had set up. I still have recordings of that from 1969. And we'd eat Vienna sausages out of a can. Terrible. That's what Raymond had. And I also remember going with her and staying with her, and on the weekend, we'd go 8 miles to Cordell, which is a big deal. It was, thank goodness we're going somewhere. And we'd go to the bank and sit and have a Coke, because at the bank you could sit and have a cold drink. And then we go to Puckett's grocery store and buy groceries, and she'd get, the real Dr. Pepper. And then we'd go to Lefty's for a hamburger. and sit on in a little school desk, I think, because they had one bar and it was full, and you'd have this thin, greasy, really good hamburger, and I remember sitting at the park while she'd have her guitar lesson. I remember that. There you
Yeah,
go.
great. Just sit it down. Okay, does anyone else want to, Jamie, you want to say something?
Y'all said a bunch of good stuff.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Is that Billy going to say something?
She's got a,
Okay.
she's thought of something.
Yeah,
Set it wrong.
yeah, just pick up that little mic there. There you go.
That y'all all should know. And she was the best mother-in-law that ever was. And, you know, you've always heard the stories about mother-in-laws, but she was the sweetest, kindest mother-in-law that I had for all those years.
Fantastic.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, I would like for all the cousins, first cousins, to come on up, and let's stand together. And man, do I have that thing on mute? That sure looks bright. Wow. Okay, come on up. Let's move over some. Yeah. Come on up. Now, I don't know if we're all in it. Move on over. Move on over. Come on, David, make sure you're in here. Okay.
Are we in the picture?
All right.
Are we in the picture?
Am I out of it?
Everybody come this way. We may have to do sideways. Stand sideways.
I think you're good.
Are we in it now? Okay.
Do we need to push?
Okay, we want to thank everyone for watching this family history with us. And we are all first cousins who love each other.
And Kenny exceeded my expectations. I just wanted that